Welcome back. You're listening to part 2 of the Journey to Technology Modernization in Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Rob Schadey, the Director of Business Mission in the Program Executive Office for Enterprise Information Systems at the U.S. Army, and Don Schuerman, the Chief Technology Officer and Vice President of Product Marketing at Pega. During the last segment, we talked about kind of different pieces and parts of this IT modernization, if you will, roadmap of this journey that I think a lot of agencies are on. And something that you both mentioned was the data piece. So let's go down that path a little bit. One of the reasons why that the IT modernization is so important is because of this tsunami of data, the big data challenge. Yeah. So Don, start with maybe this idea of where IT modernization fits to bring data together. We mentioned APIs, we're gonna get to that in a second, but give me a sense.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of sides to this. I mean, obviously, one, the push to AI enable anything, right? And AI is a beast that feeds on data, right? That's how we train it, that's how we find insights from it, that's how we drive it. So that demands that we have systems that are actually able to feed the AI engines if we want to drive any insight, if we want to discover inefficiencies, if we want to discover better ways of operating, if we want to fine tune, that needs data. And most of the underlying system infrastructure that we have is not built to deliver the data in that way. It's not built to work with the massively scaled, sort of non-relational data structures that these engines tend to use. So there's a huge sort of technology need to modernize or at least API-ify some of the back ends so that we can begin to feed into that. I think there's another piece, which is we increasingly have workers and employees who want and expect transparency, visibility into that data through business intelligence tools, so they can be able to mine it, see the status, get a view into where the mission is at any given point in time. And again, the lack of sort of real-time ability to not just look at one system, but pull data from a series of systems together, and that continual problem of business intelligence, I think, is also a big driver of a lot of this.
I think from the Army perspective, I don't want to say that we're necessarily in the dark, but each one of our functional areas, especially with respect to business missions, has had its data. And we're just now turning the light on with respect to data and the way that data needs to be worked across each one of the functional domains. And we're addressing questions that, frankly, we may not have had thought of before. So we are really focused on data accuracy through business process. And one of the methods that we're really employing is agile methods, working with our functionals to understand what those business processes are, and then how we need to work back through to bring accuracy and results in that data for dashboard type of technologies.
Let me jump in for a second. Rob, one of the things that Don mentioned was AI, and I mentioned in my beginning that the Army has an AI task force. The Army is doing a lot of work around data and mashing those two things together. Where does the POEIS fit in when we talk AI task force and the feeding the beast?
So at present, Army CIOG6 is responsible for the AI task force. I see PEOEIS fitting into that by supporting the data cleansing efforts and to make sure that those processes and data will support those artificial intelligence needs and requirements.
Are you guys sitting on the task force yet? Or are you guys just kind of getting some to-do lists, if you will?
I think we're getting to-do lists to make sure we're focused on the cleansing of that data.
Perfect. And then Don, jump in as well, because the couple of things that Rob talked about, data accuracy, there's always this push, the data has to be perfect before we can use it. And we know that's not the case, but people still have to get past that. Where does the IT modernization kind of roadmap fit in to kind of ensure, begin using your data to get results from the data?
Yeah, I really liked hearing Rob use the term process around data, right? And not just because I work for a process software company. But I really do think that too often data cleanliness initiatives are viewed entirely through the lens of sort of master data management, right? As a big one-time batch, I'm going to shove a bunch of data here, I'm going to shove a bunch of data there, we're going to clean it up, boom, new system, good to go. Whereas really, data cleanliness needs to be viewed as sort of an ongoing and continuous thing the business needs to put in place. So how do you make sure that you actually have those processes, that every time data gets touched, it's being cleansed, that every time it's getting validated? And that's especially important because, to Rob's other point, a lot of this data effort is about creating or merging, at least virtually, data that historically has lived in different missions or different silos of the organization. So having those processes that work across all of that and making sure that data that's getting updated over here is actually finding itself relevant and checked against the needs of this group over there, that really requires not just technology, but a lot of process thinking about how you're going to have that, where does ownership of different elements of the data live, and who becomes accountable for maintaining it.
Rob, do you want to talk a little bit about that data ownership issue and the process thinking? Because I think, as you said, you're bringing in the Army's bringing in a lot of different pieces and parts. So there's a chief data officer, at least there was in the Army at one point. I'm sure there's going to be one again. Where's PEO, EISC, kind of the data cleansing piece and the data kind of as you bring it all together?
Enterprise data governance is really paramount, as Dom was alluding to. And for the Army, our approach has been to focus on each one of those functional domains and have data ownership within those domains to kind of harmonize and bring everything together. And again, the focus is on the business process because we know that data will change, that those data elements will change over time. But that focus of ownership and governance from an enterprise perspective is really paramount for us to continue operating and moving forward. And bringing sort of a life cycle approach to the way that we manage our data is part of that process that we want to put in place.
And I think this tags back well to the broader conversation of IT modernization, because once you kind of have that governance and those process changes, address them, that's when you can then insert the APIs, and then the missions can really start to benefit from that data. Where are you guys down this path right now? Are you just in the governance business process, or are you starting to kind of have some pockets of success of getting data to the mission area much more quickly and in a much better way?
I think as an Army, we've had some great successes with respect to getting the data to our dashboard type of capabilities that we've put in place. And we see that through the questions that are being asked and the way we're operationalizing, if you will, in support of the mission, the answers that we need to have for the data that we're receiving. And again, being able to kind of visualize that and start down that path of understanding what's in the realm of possible and knowing what question to ask to tune that data is our focus and really where we're at with this agile approach we're taking to data management within the Army.
And Don, jump in, because let's broaden this. Maybe what are you seeing from customers in the federal government or state and local or private sector when it comes to data? Where are a lot of these organizations at in terms of managing data to get to the point where Rob's talking about?
Well, I think a lot of them are in similar spaces, right? There's been progress towards sort of a dashboard, right? Let's get common views so that we can all work off that. I think the next phase is really getting organizations to think about, okay, now what does this allow us to innovate? What does this allow us to push forward? And I think the broader point here that I think is really important is so much of what we call enterprise IT modernization isn't actually systems, right? It isn't actually, the challenge of building an API isn't actually building the API. You get a couple smart engineers, you build an API kind of quick, right? The challenge is actually thinking about the mission and the functions of the business through the context of that API and getting the organization aligned around that API being a window into a function in a business. And that is far harder than the actual sort of technical challenge of, okay, I'm gonna write some code that generates a REST service on the other end, right? So I think where I see organizations either succeed or fail is at that part of the of the journey, and then that's what enables you to pull this stuff together, into process. So we're working with DSS on the National Background Investigation System. So how you actually drive background checks and security clearances, right? And automating that from end to end, which is really where the end sort of value comes, first demands that all the underlying systems have the data and the APIs in place that I can actually construct that process together across what has really historically been a number of different functions.
I think it's important too to focus on platform-based technologies. It really kind of harmonizes that community against the way things are done, and it brings focus to other innovations and ideas to help support that end-to-end process. And using the right platform technologies, we as the Army have put KPIs and metrics in place to kind of track and manage everything that's going on. But then we've also found opportunities to, for example, innovate with automation through incidents and service desk capabilities. That has been a tremendous benefit toward taking away time that can be applied toward mission and the soldier.
Well, that's I think kind of what you guys are getting at with the whole idea of enterprise architecture as a service, right? Is providing that platform that then becomes the common working point for different functions to come together.
One of the things that I'm hearing through this conversation is getting data to the right people so they can make better decisions. And I think in many ways for any organization, that's the end goal. It's nice to have modern systems. It's nice, as Don was talking about, it's rarely the technology, it's always the change of business process or the culture. We love to say that. So Rob, maybe lead off with a little bit, the APIs you're starting to see in the dashboard, but if you look forward a little bit, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but the end goal of all of this is so the commanders and people on the battlefield can make better decisions in real time. Do you see that end goal? Is the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak?
I think to some extent we are getting a better handle in what capability is going to be enabled to support that mission. The small wins, such as service desk capabilities that allow, for example, a soldier to self-serve, change their password, which is one form of automation, all the way to looking through problems to solve their own issues or problem, is the sort of light that we're bringing to the end of the tunnel with the soldier. When we start going down the path of artificial intelligence and machine learning, we're very much going to embrace the direction that Lieutenant General Crawford is laying out to kind of discover what's in the realm of possible and where the Army needs to make those investments to support those initiatives.
And I think that concept of getting to quick wins, right, of doing the sort of proof of concept and really buying the credibility with a large organization to succeed is the way that you get there, whether that's on the modernization of a data process, or even in the beginning of using something, like AI technology. We worked with a large bank in Australia, and one of their pilot use cases for AI technology was just simply, can we automate the inbound take of emails so that we don't have to manually reply to every email that comes in, right? And getting people to understand that, hey, that can add some value. It can take a little bit of burden off of our servicing team, so they're not actually replying to emails all day. Gets comfort of some of these new technologies, and also starts people's wheels turning about, okay, where in my mission can I apply this? Where in what I do could I apply this to make it better for my stakeholders?
Don, this has come up a couple times, this idea of automation, and I think Rob's example of changing passwords, we all hate. I didn't think you were supposed to use this password anymore. I thought it was all CAC, but maybe not. But I guess my question for you, Don, is around automation, and where does that kind of start to play into this as well? What are you starting to see?
Well, so I think there one area where we've seen it is in this concept of robotic automation, or RPA, and I actually think of RPA as a legacy modernization band-aid, right? I don't think it's an end state where anybody necessarily wants to be, but the nice thing about RPA is because the way it works is it interacts with a desktop system the way a human does. So if you've got a legacy system that doesn't have an API, it gives you a shortcut of getting at that system and beginning to pull that system's data into the process. So using that as a kind of quick fix band-aid to automate some portions of the user experience or to be able to pull data into a broader process we've seen is really useful. I also think that there also has to be an increased amount of automation on the IT side itself. If the hot topics around DevOps and continuous integration, continuous deployment is really around modernization of the software development lifecycle. So the other thing that's important as you roll out some of these new agile approaches is backing that up with the automation that's really what actually allows a team of developers to move at scale, but also do it safely. So I think there are lots of places where we see automation sort of sliding in as part of the modernization agenda, both to help accelerate, fill some near-term gaps, and then, as I said earlier, the whole purpose of this is to get to better processes and better experiences. And that generally means things that are more automated, but generally in a way of making them more seamless. There's a lot of automation that's required to allow somebody to self-serve change their password, right? But the goal here is not the automation. The goal is to enable, my constituents or my soldiers in the field to do this password change quickly and easily without having to spend a bunch of time on the phone to make it happen.
Exactly. And
jump in real quick.
Just to address the Army's approach with RPA, we have ITGC and risk management framework compliance initiatives. RPA has been really instrumental in two ways: to discover accounts that we haven't been using for long periods of time, which also leads to opportunities to negotiate over licensing and to understand our costs moving forward. So RPA has been incredibly efficient and useful with application to some of our business systems. And it's an area we'll continue to explore as we're in a legacy environment.
And I know that the Army Financial Management Office also is exploring RPA quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff going around. We could talk a lot more, but we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to part 2 of the Journey to Technology Modernization in Government, sponsored by Pega on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.